Hi. The first thing I want to talk about is grinding coffee. So why do we grind coffee? Um, Really, we grind coffee so that we can kind of break it up into really small pieces so that we can extract it in a time that's kind of conducive with normal human interactions. You can brew kind of full bean coffee. It will just take a very, very long time. So when we're grinding, what we're trying to do is break it up into really small pieces so that we can extract it in a time. I mean, for example, this is like 25 seconds, so we need to grind it fine enough that we can extract all the nice stuff out of there in 25 seconds. For something like a cafetiere, it's going to be something like 4 minutes, so we don't need to grind it quite as fine. We don't need to allow as much access to coffee. But basically, we're grinding things up into tiny little pieces so that we can increase that surface area. So how do we do that? Initially, people started to make coffee. You'd use something like this, like a pestle and mortar. Ooh, sorry about that. And then you just basically pound coffee with in between two kind of hard surfaces. You'd squish it down, and then you'd increase the surface area that way. And you'd get some results with that. You'd get things being extracted in a quicker time. What it doesn't give you is kind of accuracy. What you start to get is machines being developed to do that in a better way, more kind of uniform, repeatable manner. So you have things like a millstone being used to grind coffee as well, and that's just basically coffee going between two big stones, and you turn a handle and coffee comes out the outside, and you collect it, and then you get some sort of uniform kind of grind size, and the surface area, there's a lot of surface area there, so you get a lot of extraction fairly quickly. Not ideal, again fairly labor intensive, big heavy stone, moving that around, not tremendous. So electric motor starts to come onto the scene, things become a lot easier, and you start to get mechanical versions of that sort of thing happening, and you start to get the materials that those kind of stones are made out of, those two pieces of material being made out of things like steel or ceramic or something like that. And you start to get a lot more kind of accuracy occurring. So instead of having a kind of really rough kind of stones, underneath you have kind of very precision cut kind of steel burrs or ceramic burrs. And that means we can start with that. We can start to vary the distance between those two things, and we can start to control the grind size a little bit. So if we have the gap between the burrs larger, then we'll get coarser coffee. If we have them really close together, we'll get finer coffee. So that enabled us to start to control the brew a bit more. So I've ground some coffee just to show you what that looks like. So I have another grinder on the other side there that I use normally on a day-to-day, and it's a little burr grinder. And you start to get things that look like this. Whereas obviously if I haven't done a lot of pounding with the pestle and mortar, but you can see there's I've hardly done anything there, but anyway, there we go. The one thing that people have hold against the burr grinder is the fact that it can be quite expensive. So you do have other things in homes. You have the kind of blade grinder, which is basically just a kind of scaled down blender. I've got a little hand blender which does the same sort of thing, so we'll grind a little bit of that just to show you. I'll take some out of the hopper there, and we'll just grind a little bit more. There we go. Hopefully this will work first time. Didn't last time, but there we go. So lock that in place and that on. Yeah. So with the blade grinder, what we're actually doing is we're just smashing the beans up. We're basically spinning knives at it, just like a blender does. One of the problems you have is you don't get that evenness that you have with a burr grinder, but it is cheap. This one is, you get an attachment on there. Okay, you do get like little attachments. This is a hand blender, which my wife will be very happy I'm using for this, but there we go. So if you can have a look inside there, you can see there's quite a large amount of sort of big chunks sitting there. And also if I move this around a bit, you'll see the stuff stuck to the outside. I mean, just like every kind of blender, you get if you blend any kind of vegetables and stuff, you get stuff stuck to the outside of the blender, and you get other bits that kind of go to the middle, and then stuff that just bounces on the blades and doesn't actually get cut up. And the same thing happens with coffee, and that sort of becomes a problem when we start to brew, because we start to get uneven extraction. We get two different sizes of coffee being extracted, or a myriad of different sizes of coffee being extracted. The way people tend to get their heads around this is when you talk about cooking potatoes. So if you kind of cooked baking potatoes and new potatoes together in the same pot, there's no point where they would both be ready. You would either undercook the baking potatoes or overcook the new potatoes, or a combination of, or do no good a job with either of them. But there's no point where they're all perfectly kind of cooked. And this is kind of the same situation with this kind of stuff that you've got in the blade grinder. There's no point where you're extracting both particle sizes the same, so we don't get much control. And that's important because we want to start to control the flavour and make things nice. We want to have nice, tasty drinks. This does break stuff up into small pieces and allows you to have your caffeine fix, and it will be all right. If we want to move it on a little bit, we need to start using different bits of kit, really. There are hand versions of burr grinders. You'll have to have a lot of kind of mechanical. You'll be wasting a lot of energy trying to do it. I know from when I've taken stuff away, when I've gone away on holiday, I've taken a kind of burr grinder away with me, and it takes a flipping age to do just 2 cups of coffee. You kind of keep it for emergencies, but then you have an electric burr grinder. So inside the burr grinder, we have these 2 sets of burrs. I've got a little kind of printout, and they look kind of like that. If you can see that on there. So you've got these two pieces of steel that kind of sit on top of each other, and your coffee kind of falls between them. So if we look at this grinder here, we can see the hopper on the top there. We've got this little flap on here that lets coffee through or not, and you have one set of burrs on top of another set of burrs. The bottom set of burrs is attached to a motor, and we turn it on. So if I do this, when we turn it on like that, that spins the motor on the bottom, and the top part, the second burr set, is on top of a screw thread. So the coffee goes between one, and then gets pulled and pushed as well between the 2 sets of teeth. So we can make that gap larger and create coarse grind coffee, or we can put it really close together and we can have a fine grind coffee. What it doesn't do is it doesn't get rid of the really, really fine stuff, but it does limit the largeness of the grind, so that it will just stay between the 2 burrs until it gets broken up into small pieces. So when we do that, we start to get a lot more control over the kind of spread of the grind size. We've basically got no control of this blade grinder, and then we start to get a lot more control of the burr grinders. That's the different kind of things that happen at home. One thing that people ask me quite a lot is how do you measure your grind size? And they say things like, well, my friend has it on 5, and this is sort of almost impossible to measure. Certainly at home. One person's 5 on one grinder is another person's 10 on another grinder. Even machines that were manufactured on the line next to each other, you'll have the same coffee in them on the machine, and you'll end up using different grind settings. So in order to change our grind setting, we're gonna move that thread on the top here. So you can see there's something on there. I can unlock that and move it. I'll not move it at the moment because it's dialed in. But we can move it, and if we move it towards the smaller numbers, we get a finer grind. If we move it towards the bigger numbers, we get a coarser grind. That's only useful for us in this situation with this grinder and this machine. It means nothing for your next door neighbour or somebody in a cafe. We also have a problem with actually measuring grind size, because we don't have one single unit that all the coffee comes out at. You have a big spread of different grind sizes, and different burrs will have different grind distributions. So you might have a big chunk of a lot of stuff coming out at one grind size, and then more at another time for a different grind size. You might have a really big long tail of how coarse or fine things are. So it's going to be different, and then that's going to change when things wear. And that's going to change also when burrs get hot. So you can see how it's really hard for us to try and measure those things. So just stick to your grinder with your machine, and use that as your reference for you. So when we start to do that grind change and move things finer or coarser, we can start to sort of try and select flavors from the coffee that we want to extract. If we have really coarse ground coffee and we run it through this type of machine, water will fly through, it won't take enough stuff out of it to make it taste nice. Also, equally on the flip side, if we have it really, really fine, it's going to take an absolute eon to come through, and we're going to sort of take too much out, and we're going to sort of over extract that coffee. So we want to avoid those two things. For every different kind of brewing device, there are sort of areas where things have worked well in the past. These are the sort of things that you'll see on the internet. So you'll have maybe around a 25-second mark for your espresso extraction, or around a 4-minute brew time for your cafetiere, things like that. So there are kind of sort of tried and tested, this is what humans have done for a long time, this is what tastes nice. It does well to pay attention to those things, because they haven't come from nowhere, they've come from lots of other people drinking coffee. Okay, so that's a little bit on grinding. Oh, we'll show you this as well, the espresso grind. So you'll be able to see from this we're in a different ballpark entirely. Because we're messing around with pressure, we need to counteract that flow with much more fine ground coffee. Otherwise, we're just going to get horrible tasting stuff. But there we go. So, grinding coffee. Use burr grinders.